Today, I'm joined by Jasmine Oibro, Blend's resident website strategy expert, to talk about the most common UX website mistakes we see in B2B marketing. So, Jasmine, what are some of the biggest and most common UX mistakes that you see in B2B website design, and how can listeners address them?
So I think a common one that I tend to see in looking at other websites that we've not been involved in building, and also the startup phase of building a new website, is when people approach a homepage and don't really think about the optimal flow and content. So they tend to treat it as a brochure, thinking that this is the face of this website and need to summarize everything that is contained within. And what you usually end up with is a very, very long homepage that people don't engage with because it's too much to scroll through. You don't really know what to focus on as a page visitor either. And the easiest way to solve for this is really to compress the page length. You need to be quite brutal in terms of sorting away, removing all of these superfluous links to different pages. It doesn't need to be a secondary navigation, if you will, for everything else. And if you want to summarize things like your services or talk about your products, you can provide an overview of those and link through to the appropriate pages rather than try to cover everything off on the homepage.
So it sounds like because the homepage is the most visited site on page on the site for most businesses, some fall into the trap of trying to get everything that the whole site does and says onto that page, and duplicate to some extent everything else that the site holds on the other page as well. But that's something they should avoid. It sounds like, and they should go for a more restrained approach to populating their homepage.
Most definitely. And also try to not revert to the old fallback of let's add it in just in case. Because sometimes, and I know that myself, where it feels like the homepage might be a little bit too light, and you say, okay, if people haven't found by now what they should continue with reading, so click on products or services, for example, let's toss in some links to the blog or to the About Us page, just to be on the safe side that they can find something to look at.
Mm-hmm.
And this, this underestimates the audience a little bit because they are clever enough to find the footer. They are clever enough to find the main navigation. And if they're interested in those pieces of information, they are going to be activated through those means of navigation as well.
Gotcha. So careful homepage design, not replicating everything you've got, and considering your visitor's experience. What else do we see go wrong?
Copy. And in terms of copy, sorry. As a non-native English speaker myself, one thing I can struggle with a lot visiting websites is understanding what people actually do and sell. And sometimes it might be that people are struggling or trying too hard to hit SEO keywords. It may be that they're not really willing to commit to saying that we only do this one thing. They want to show the breadth of everything that they do and can offer. The problem is that as a site visitor, I come in, I have a look at a fantastic headline and have no idea what they actually sell, service, or who they do it for. It also doesn't help with scannability of a page. So if we have sections that outlines and explain things like our products or services, but we don't actually call them out and call them those things, it's very, very tricky for a site visitor to understand what kind of information you're trying to provide them with.
Yeah.
So I'd say that, cleaning up headlines and then trying to have copy as clear and concise as possible is the way to go on all pages throughout the entire website, really.
Yeah. Clear and concise typically performs best in my experience too. And writing for scannability as well. Crucially, visitors are not going to pore over every single word on your site or page, and therefore long copy just isn't going to get consumed. But I also think that sometimes marketers think it's their job to make language cleverer, and to put in color and tone and brand to the detriment and to the loss of clarity, and that's where it goes wrong. So it's important to strike the balance between the creative aspect of it, compelling copy that's creative, but also communicating and getting your meaning across. So important too.
I was going to say, this is oftentimes when working with copywriters who know their stuff. I am not a copywriter. I can hopefully look and recognize it when I see it when others do it, but I struggle myself as well to put, lovely words in a concise way. But they can often be of great help to just make sure you have that scannability and basically say, we do X for audience Y, without having that too basic or too clear of a language as well.
Yeah.
And then
Copywriting for the web being a skill, a discipline in its own right, just like strategy aspects and design.
Exactly. And I think also as a marketer, we don't only get to be creative using words. We can also help with the design elements, if you will. So we amplify what is said with text through the means of things like visual cues. So if we think of product photos, client logos, showcasing the same things that we've been saying in words, they help sort of build this overarching picture of, okay, this is exactly what they do, if people are still being a little bit apprehensive about engaging with the text and reading through everything we want them to actually look at.
Right. So good to reinforce the written message with the visual elements of the website again, rather than just go off and create things that, either look nice or satisfy our creative side solely.
Exactly. And this is also a fantastic way to, make sure that you get branding and design in there so that you have a nice little package of not just it looks good, but it's also you can interact with it in the best possible way. And obviously that the copy and everything is clear and flowing.
Great. What about site contents? Are there pages or sections that, are commonly seen but less effective, or, mistakes people should look out for there?
A trap I commonly fall into myself is thinking around segmented pages. And in particular, when we go into this whole thought process around should we have industry pages on the website or not, you may also come across like having different verticals, using personas, trying to categorize things based on use cases or application areas. And I say that the most common the most common trap within this is really not thinking too hard about what you actually want to use the page for. And I think you've said it earlier, where it's very, very common that these segmented pages become about the segment and not for the segment. And they're not actually something that the segment would use. So as a marketing strategist, I may not go to a website and look, this is a page for marketing strategists that tells me the same kind of information I should be able to get from the rest of the website, but just use the word marketing strategy thrown in there a couple of times.
Yeah.
So if you go down the path of feeling that, okay, we really, really necessarily have to have these pages, you need to think through the on-page content to make sure it is actually for this target audience and that it's got good individual contextual information that they can actually use. And most often that is supported by having an SEO purpose.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's sort of people would be looking for IT support in London in particular, and that's why you have a segmented page for your London-based IT support rather than trying to desperately identify a group that you can have a segmented page for.
I see. Gotcha. And when it comes to, design and layout or appearance of pages, is there anything that listeners need to look out for and be mindful of in how they approach that?
So it's always a tricky balance, I think, in terms of going, do we go identical twins or do I do complete opposites?
Mm-hmm.
And with that, I mean, is that having been in the position at one point in time, being an in-house marketer, you got a website and you feel that I need to get messaging out there on the website. And you sit down and you update pages. And what you end up with is a website with lots of pages with very, very different styles and way of presenting things. And that is always going to confuse the audience. From a UX perspective, we want to make sure that when somebody's on the Blend website, for example, or if they're visiting, I will take IKEA as an example, but IKEA, or they're looking at PepsiCo's website, for example, if they go into product page, they should know that they're on a product page. So it follows the general kind of signposting that we would see across other websites.
Mm-hmm.
It explains the product, might have product photos on there, and especially on the same website, having multiple pages of the same type, they're very reminiscent of each other. We have the same kind of on-page elements and the same kind of checklist in the flow, if you will. But that needs to weigh against not having copies of everything everywhere.
Right.
Just because I find it a good idea to have 5 pages about different kind of hair color, these should have very different contextual information. Again, going back to copy, where if I visit one page, I get the information about that specific product. But if I visit another page, it's not like I'm rereading the same thing and looking at the same content again, but just with 1 or 2 words switched out. So I think that's a very roundabout way of saying that we want to make sure that when you're visiting pages on the website, they're visually of the same brand. They're very cohesive in what they present and how they present information. But we want to make sure that pages exist for purpose. So they're not just copies of each other in terms of what content they actually present.
Right. Okay. I see. Yeah. Interesting. What about UX, in particular navigation? When I look at websites, I think a lot about how buyers interact with and travel through the sites in question. Have you got any advice for people when it comes to their navigation or global UX?
I say not everything needs to be in the main menu.
Right.
We also have on-page navigational elements. So basically, that would be how you navigate between pages from pages themselves. And I think that can be a very powerful tool in terms of thinking about what you present on the pages and how.
It sounds like you're suggesting that people remember that they have both, horizontal, main navigation at their disposal, as well as signposts and links throughout the pages of their site. And it's important to use both in conjunction. And to your point, constraining what you present users with in your main navigation is really important, because it's just so easy to cross a line from being helpful to presenting too much and overwhelming them and creating that choice paralysis that big mega menus can so easily do. From my point of view, I tend to look for navigation that's device appropriate. A burger menu is a requirement on a mobile phone screen, but it's certainly not a requirement or the best approach on a desktop screen, for example. And a device appropriate approach is typically a user, a familiar and intuitive one to the user. So those are the things that I tend to look for.
I was going to say, I couldn't have said it better myself. No, it's very, very nicely, succinctly summarized. I think to add to that is, in terms of menus, it's sometimes we can get a little bit gung-ho about adding lots and lots of subcategories to pages. So for example, if we're not often selling t-shirts in B2B, are we? But if we have a category page, for example, for a clothing item, and we say that we're selling ladies' dresses, and then to that, we could have lots of subcategories in terms of the different styles of dresses, etc. As you just mentioned, it can be very overwhelming for someone opening up a navigation and then seeing all of those different subcategories available to them. The same can be said for presenting products for B2B or services, where in the minds of whoever is creating the website or managing the website, it's very, very clear how service A and service B differs from each other. But in the eyes of the person trying to navigate and read up about it, it's sort of the same thing.
Yeah.
And so it's often better to then lead them towards the higher category ones where they can see an overview, and from there navigate onto the sub-service or sub-product pages, if you will, to read more detailed information rather than present everything in the menu and they have no idea where to look.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose that depends very much on the unique case and the size of the website required. I was thinking, you've taught me over the years that in terms of the navigation and indeed the structure of the site, sometimes it's better to have no page in a particular position. Creating an unnecessary category page, for example, when the category is small, can sometimes be, well, at the very least, a waste of budget potentially in the whole scheme of the project, but also, create a page that isn't going to be frequently visited, isn't going to contain a lot of unique value, will repeat information that is on other pages quite rightly. And so it sounds like, depending on the nature of the site you're building, you need to make judgment calls about whether you need to organize pages within categories or forego the category page and get straight to the detail.
Yeah. And this is one of those, like, how long is a piece of string kind of situations where it's like, in what situations? And I think that ties very nicely into things like information architecture. So, what kind of information do we present, and what do we need to surface and make evident for the people visiting the website? So, tying that back a little bit to the homepage, for example, if we have a homepage where we have the luxury of explaining our services, and we don't have too many of them going on, so we've got 3 main services, for example, that would do very, very well to function the same way as an overview page of services.
Right.
And what we then don't want to do is double up and have that services overview page as well, that just not even recontextualizes, but presents the same information as the homepage and makes it a little bit confusing for the site visitor in terms of why do I need to look there.
Yeah, and creates more clicks on the journey to the important information and the conversion that we want. Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Exactly.
Any other UX mistakes that you see, or final thoughts?
Some more UX mistakes. I think it is probably when people rely a little bit too much on just adding links for everything. I don't know if this is a bit of a tangent, but back at university, I took a course in art at some point, and they spoke about there was an era in European art where they had, I can't pronounce it because it's Latin, but fear of the empty.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the time, looking at designs or looking at what you find on a website, we seem to be very afraid of just presenting information and not having that link through to something else.
Right.
And
Yes.
on occasion, it can be worth just saying, I have contextualized this piece of information for you on this page presenting our services, so you don't have to go to this other sub page to find out more.
Indeed.
And exactly. And also, if we really necessarily need to add in those on-page links to lead people to look at other pieces of information or do other actions, not have too many of them, because that is, again, choice paralysis. I don't know what I should be clicking on. And also be very, very clear in terms of what clicking on something does.
Right.
And this comes down to wording. I'm a little bit allergic to things like read more, because that doesn't really tell you what it entails. If you're in a blog, fine. I understand I'm going to be taken to a blog article to read the blog article. But if I'm on your homepage and it says services, read more, I'm not sure if I'm going to be taken through to case studies, if you're going to show me more services, if you're going to take me through to a specific service, etc. So it's good to try to be as contextual and clear as possible with those kind of terms and links and buttons, really.
Yeah. Specificity and clarity and honesty in calls to action of all types is typically what performs best. And once again, here it's an area where sometimes the instincts of marketers goes almost diametrically opposite to the wants and needs of buyers on the site. So if you can get yourself thinking in terms of your buyer, put yourself in your buyer's shoes, then you can potentially avoid a lot of these pitfalls.